Good evening. Welcome, everyone, to the fourth and final Black History Month discussion hosted by All of Us. My name is Jamaica Miles. I'm the co-founder and executive director of All of Us. But what's pertinent this evening is I also happen to be an elected official. I was elected to the school board in 2021. And tonight, we're going to have a conversation about representation, politics in upstate New York, specifically Black representation. I'm very happy to be joined by these four individuals. I mean, how beautiful is the screen just by itself? But I'm going to go in alphabetical order, so no favoritism, and ask our panelists to introduce themselves. I'm going to start with D. Colin.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Dee Colin. I am a multidisciplinary artist living in the Capital Region. And I ran for city council to represent District 1 in Troy in what is time?
Right. 2021.
2021. Yeah.
Thank you for joining us, D. Colin. Up next, Batman. I know I said alphabetical, but technically it is still alphabetical if I'm using your government.
Right. For official purposes, Paul Collins-Hackett. I'm from Albany, New York, born and raised, and I'm fortunate enough to serve as the secretary on our Community Police Review Board. Our CPRB was recently empowered, largely through the people. That's the only way that happened. So I'm grateful for this space. Thank you guys for facilitating these conversations, and I hope I can be of service.
Listen, all the time and always on time. Up next, Damonni Farley.
Hey, greetings, everyone. Happy to be here. My name is Damonni Farley. I am a city councilman here in the city of Schenectady. Amongst other things, I am a husband, I am a father, and I am a concerned and cared for citizen in the city of Schenectady who is all about uplifting and amplifying marginalized communities and the voices of marginalized communities. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. And last and certainly not the least, the Honorable Marion Porterfield.
Thank you. Thank you so much. First of all, I want to say good evening to everyone. My name is Marion Porterfield, and I'm currently the president of the Schenectady City Council. I've been on there for 12 years. We'll tell more about that story later. I want to first of all thank all of us for putting this together. I'm so happy to be here with all of us to really talk about representation in the city of Schenectady and actually across the country. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
And we're going to jump right in, y'all. So the discussions that we've had this entire month started with the history, came to today, and then talked about moving forward. And we're going to follow that same pattern. We're going to start by looking at a very small video, giving us just a small reflection on our history as it relates to representation, Black representation in the country. And so I'm going to share my screen. And we're going to watch a small 8-minute video.
People don't realize that African Americans have always been a part of this nation's democracy. Black people always strongly desired the right to vote. They've always fought for being included in the political process. And then also, I think a lot of people might take for granted that African Americans always get to have that right because we had it before and we lost it. And so, presumably it could be lost again if people don't fight to protect it.
When we learn about the Reconstruction era in school, it's often taught as a dark period in American history, a time of upheaval and unrest right after the Civil War. But what often gets overlooked is that for a brief period of time, thousands of Black representatives were elected to office all over the South.
My estimate is that there were about 2,000 African American men who held public office during Reconstruction. Offices ranging from the Senate. There were 2 black senators, 14 members of the House of Representatives, 600 or 700 members of state legislatures, and then dozens of other offices, state level, local level, etc.
So what was going on was that, first of all, a lot of the former Confederates, the most outspoken leaders of white supremacy, were not allowed to serve in Congress. And so, with those people absent, there were people that did believe that African Americans should be folded into the fabric of American civil and political life, and that did advocate for Black people to be able to vote. And then, of course, when African Americans were prevented from voting, federal troops or federal investigators would often be called in order to protect those African Americans' rights in order to cast a ballot.
At the time, many states in the South were either majority Black or close to it. And because of that, they were able to elect Black legislators, especially at the state level.
The most significant accomplishment of Black legislators in many Southern states during Reconstruction was the establishment of public school systems, not only for African Americans, but for white students as well. And even though these were segregated, they were often the first time that many African Americans, fresh out of slavery, had an opportunity to learn to read and write.
The highest level of office reached by these Black legislators was the U.S. Senate, and the first was Hiram Revels, a U.S. Senator from the state of Mississippi.
So Hiram Revels was a pretty unique individual in that he was educated, and he later became a civil rights champion, before the Civil War, certainly during the Civil War. And then afterward, he was sent to Mississippi, where he was appointed by the state legislature to be a United States Senator. In response to Black political power during Reconstruction, the South was just rife with violence in every single Southern state. And the most obvious early example of that violence was the Ku Klux Klan, which did all sorts of different things, but attacked everything from school teachers to politicians to farmers. And so these different waves of violence really popped up, especially during election days. And so in 1875 Mississippi, there was an organized overthrow, essentially, of the state Republican Party, which did include African Americans. There was violence at the polls in different cities, and that spread throughout the entire South. 1876, there was violence in different places like Florida and South Carolina and Louisiana that led to contested elections that ultimately paved the way for Reconstruction to end.
That overthrow was not put into law really until another generation, let's say around 1900, when Southern states figured out ways to abrogate the 15th Amendment, which had been enacted in Reconstruction to guarantee Black men's suffrage.
So once the 15th Amendment became law, Southern states couldn't disfranchise African Americans simply by saying Black people are no longer allowed to vote. And so in response to Reconstruction, in order to eliminate the Black vote, they had to come up with new ideas in order to make sure African Americans were taken off the voter rolls. And the most powerful of those methods was the literacy test, which allowed for local registrars in a county courthouse usually to look at a candidate and give the candidate a literacy test to see if they were qualified to register to vote. The nature of the test usually didn't matter. The person would just define whether they were qualified to vote based on whether they thought they were white or Black.
And so you had a period, from 1900 to the 1965, the Voting Rights Act, where very few African Americans were allowed to vote throughout the entire South. For a long, long time.
Hi, everyone. Mark Barden here
Commercials.
at Sandy Hook Promise. On December 14th, 2012.
Reconstruction was portrayed by scholars, but also by the teachers and the general public as sort of the lowest point in American history, a period of corruption, misgovernment, and this idea that Reconstruction was a disaster was part of the legitimation of the old Jim Crow South. The underlying message was the South was correct in taking away the right to vote from Black men, and that if Blacks were given the right to vote again, you just have another replay of the horrors of Reconstruction.
But I think one of the things in American history that we often teach is that there's a constant march toward things getting better. And it's a little bit tricky to teach Reconstruction because, African Americans during Reconstruction could vote in much of the South, and then things actually got a lot worse. And so it doesn't really fit into this narrative of constant progress throughout America since the Civil War. And so, in this day and age where we have numerous African American senators, just look at a place like Georgia where Raphael Warnock was elected, and white Georgians are largely trying to respond through tactics like voter suppression to tamp down the Black vote after the Black vote largely sent this African American man to the United States Senate.
After the 2020 elections, we saw historical voters of color turn out and a lot of first-time voters, even during a global pandemic. And after that, we saw Republican-controlled legislatures across the country drop hundreds of anti-voting bills. And so when we saw that collective activity happening, we had to go to the federal government and ask for protections.
Hillary Hawley works for Fair Fight Action, an organization working to fight voter suppression around the country. Though literacy tests remain a thing of the past, many states have enacted laws that purge voter rolls in ways that target minorities, or have made voting more difficult by closing polling places in largely Black areas. Fair Fight is now working to get legislation such as the John Lewis Voting Rights Act passed in Congress to stop these tactics.
So we started working with Congress basically right out the gate in January 2021 to help ensure that the legislation was drafted in a way that could actually mitigate voter suppression and combat the real attacks that we're seeing in real time.
Even though today's laws might be a bit different, they're intended with the same, outcome in mind, to make it harder for Black people to vote, to make sure that African Americans don't have equal standing of one man, one vote in the democracy in order to ensure more white control over our political systems. I think it's important to learn about Reconstruction in American history because that was a moment, I think, where our democracy held the most promise for every single person, at least every single male in the history of the United States of America, regardless of race. And I think that if we are to ever really fulfill that promise, then people need to understand the history of voting rights and voting right loss in the Reconstruction era.
Whew. So just a little bit of history, little tiny bit. And my first question to everyone on the panel, and I'll start with Damonni this time, is what are your thoughts about this wildly unknown history about Black representation and Black voting in the U.S.?
Well, my first thought is, wow. Myself, I learned some things by watching that video. I was aware of Mr. Revels. I did not know that there were thousands of Black elected officials. And I guess I would, kind of highlight the fact that that's not widely unknown just by, coincidence, right? There's a lot of intentionality with these things being, kind of hidden away. And I, feel strongly that, when we think about history isn't just, what happened or what didn't happen, really. It really informs us and helps us make a case for the future. So oftentimes, people are afraid or apprehensive to do something that hasn't been done before, right? You have a very small amount of people who will say, I have the support system, the wherewithal, I have this, this faith to do these things. But when you understand that, this isn't something new and this isn't something that hasn't happened before, I think that gives people, that would give people a level of confidence that there was not large, but larger than what one would know, point of Black representation in a time period where we would not think that it was even possible. So I think, again, I hope that people, as they receive this, it compels them to dive a little deeper into the history of Black and brown people contribution to the political landscape, and find those gems and share those gems with people. Let them know, like, hey, we've been here before and have overcome larger and stronger odds to get where we're at.
I appreciate that. Colin, what does this mean in the context of Troy that has such a limited scope of representation. Do you think folks would either be more participatory or, think differently if they understood the Black history of voting and representation?
Yeah, I think that's true for anywhere, that knowledge is a catalyst for liberation. And without it, we continue to think within limitations, So yeah, I think that's true for Troy. I think that's true for anywhere you go. I think that's also, it says something about not just the suppression of the vote, but also the attack on literature in schools, the the mission to ban books everywhere, the attack on DEI departments, and not just for K through 12, but it's extending into higher education now. And I don't think New York State is exempt from those things. I think sometimes we think of the Northeast and it's like, oh yeah, it's the Northeast. And it's like, yeah, no, like, there's a lot of work that we have to do up here as well. And because knowledge is power, it really is. It goes beyond the vote. It also goes into how are folks getting information, and how are we engaging them with the knowledge that they need to know. I think Black History Month is important. It's a time where we can celebrate, we can honor our history, but Black History Month should be like a launching pad for like the rest of the year in finding more knowledge about what has happened already in this country and beyond.
Yes, just yes. Marion, as the veteran elected official, I was trying to choose my words carefully. You have way more experience than the rest of us, and thinking from that lens of this small piece of history, where does that bring you?
So first of all, I want to say that I don't know that a lot of people really knew that when during Reconstruction that a lot of Blacks were registered Republicans. I think that a lot of people just didn't know that. They just assumed we were always Democrats, and why and how we even got there, and the kind of violence that happened that kind of pushed us like they don't want us clearly, so now we're over here. So through that lens, I definitely know that we have to continually talk about what has happened and how we got here, and really appreciate what it takes to be an elected official, to kind of stand on the front lines, and how important it is for those who vote to make sure that they vote. Because I can share a couple stories with you. There was a young man who worked in the community, did a great job on a particular project that he was working on. And he was really, the people, some electeds were really impressed by the job he was doing and wanted to continue to work with him. Didn't really know him. So do you know where they went to look for him? On the voter rolls. And they did not find him there. And therefore he was like persona non grata after that. So it's really important, and people have to recognize the importance of not just registering, but also voting, and not just voting in the presidential election, which a lot of people say, I only vote in the real election, like the rest of it's not real. But so I really talk to people and engage people, and like, we have to vote because local politics is really most of what impacts your life. I'm not saying that state and federal levels don't. However, if you don't have representation at the local level that can reach to the state level on your behalf, then you've really done yourself a disservice in not voting. And additionally, what you've done by not voting is what you said, that the people that do vote get to make decisions for you. So, I think that we definitely have to continue the conversation, as D. Colin said, that we shouldn't just be talking about during Black History Month, but throughout the year, throughout our lives, that we should always be talking to people about the importance of being involved and engaged, and not to think, as one young man said to me recently, I don't vote because my vote doesn't matter. Well, we had a long conversation after that. You can rest assured,
I'm sure
that his vote did matter. So that's
absolutely. And again, when we think historically, there were thousands of Black elected officials in the 1800s.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Which brings me to Albany and Batman, because one of the things that I'm thinking about in this historical context, when there was all this Black representation, Albany very likely is in the position it's about to have its first Black mayor. There are 3 Black candidates running for the mayoral seat. So one of those 3 Black folks is going to be the next mayor. Does this history make a difference? What does it mean for Albany?
Yeah, I think it highlighted a couple of things. One that I think a lot of people take the ability to vote or the ability to engage for granted. I think it's something that's so common, people don't even respect, voting days when it's time we have school off, people don't even go. And our voter turnout is atrocious just across the board. So I think things like this are super important to remind everybody it doesn't have to be like this. Like, this is a very real opportunity that we should be taking advantage of, right? Um, and for me, I think it means that there's a lot of work for us to do. I think that means, just like there's those coordinated efforts, our efforts have to be just as coordinated in response,
Mhm.
right? So that's a lot of what you and all of us do, Jamaica, with voter registration events and voter engagement and this, that, and the third.
Mhm.
Those kind of things can engage people in a tangible way. And then I think we do have a very particular set of circumstances now where we can demonstrate tangible outcomes, tangible wins. We can tell everybody to vote, hey, listen, you got to do this, that. But when Jamaica's like, no, I won this thing and this is what we did, that's totally different, right?
Mhm.
Here we had local law J where we wanted additional police oversight, and transparency, from our police department. Um, our previous board was established like 20 years ago, and it's been an uphill battle to get it supported to any extent to where it had any tangible impact on what our police officers did here. Thanks to local OJ and the support of the people, an extensive ground campaign that was mailers, that was in-person workshops, that's Zooms, emails, calls, the whole 9 yards. We were able to drum up enough support where we were able to pass local OJ. Cool. Once local law J passed, now our community police review board has the ability to do independent investigations. Previously, our board would get a report of what happened in a given incident or whatever. We could look at it and be like, this is cool, or it's not. No one really had to respect the outcomes. No one really had to use those outcomes in any way. With our ability to have independent investigations, access to body cam footage, an actual budget to have a staff, we're able to show people in real time what their voting did. Like, no, this whole thing wouldn't exist. So I think right now, having people who have been a part of the system like Marion for so long, everybody who has tangible wins currently, I think we can highlight the fact that, hey, listen, don't take this for granted, do some education, and we can really direct that into something tangible. So I think we have an opportunity to move forward, and I'm very excited to see what we do with it.
Absolutely. Because for folks that don't know, it was a ballot initiative. So again, it wasn't necessarily about an individual being elected to office, but it required a vote. Folks had to show up and vote for or against local law J. And it absolutely was a historical moment that it was passed. And thank you to all the folks that were involved in getting that accomplished. And as we're thinking about this, right, and we're moving forward, what the history was, but there's a more recent history, and I feel like everyone's touched on it, of what it means for us to run for office and what that feels like and what that looks like. Um, I know what that feels like and looks like. 2021, first time ever running for elected office, ran for school board, was fortunate enough to win. Had support, knew what I was doing, like all the things, but it was massive. There were plenty of folks that were like, Jamaica's not, we're not doing it. We're not letting her be on the school board. But here we are. And you talked about it. It's about the ground game. It's about talking to folks. Because our elections, especially local elections, can be won by 100 votes or less. I know Marion can talk about this. So when folks say my vote doesn't matter, you and 99 other people, just less than a neighborhood, a block, of literally a city block, could decide a local election. that's where we are in this current historical moment. And I'm gonna start with Marion for this one to talk about your experience, right? For all the things that you are first in and what it was like to run for office and be on the city council.
Thank you. So I am the first African-American woman who's ever been elected to the city council. And we have to change that part of that history though. I will definitely say that. And I definitely have to give kudos to Joseph Allen, who was the first African-American male. And up until 2021, he was the only. Then we got, Damonni and Carl Williams. But I have to, just give a shout out to him because he broke the barrier. He laid the groundwork. He endured a lot so that I and our other council members who were there with me are able to sit in the seats that we're in. So I got on the council in 2012, and I didn't get there initially by election. I got there initially by appointment, but that was another part. And that's another part of that people don't know about in this whole political realm where you have to help other people. And then if there's an opportunity, you get appointed. And sometimes people want to renege on their deal, shall we say, which is kind of what they did with me. But me being shy and retiring like I was, now I was like, no, that's not how this works. And so for 4 months, I have to tell you, there were no people of color on the city council because they were pulling between myself and another male of color. So essentially, I was then appointed. I had to run the first year as a special election. I had to run the next year in a general election, and both times I was primary. So it was like, we only have one black seat. And if you really want it, you got to work hard for it. And then we have this other person, one seat of color is what I should say, because that's essentially what they were doing. So I ran for the same seat like a number of times, but by God's grace and by the support of the people, I was able to maintain my seat. And from now until then, I have not lost an election for city council. I did run for mayor, and I did not win that because the guy I talked to and 279 people like him didn't come out and vote. We could have had this thing. So it's been an experience. And I think I'm going to say, I could, it's 12 years. So I'm not going to, everybody has to speak, but I want to tell you the best part of the experience for me was that, first of all, I feel like I was elected to keep my foot in the door. And there was times would have been easier to walk away just because there's just so much. However, I knew that's not what I should do. And so I was happy in 2021 when there was 2 young black men, Damonni Farley being one of them. I was able to help them. Damonni and I ran together, and Carl did that year as well, for them to join the city council. So now I feel like it's an opportunity to light other torches. I'm not necessarily ready to pass the torch yet, but to light other torches because I believe that's necessary. And if we really want to stay involved, we cannot give up what we've gained. Because if we do, it's like starting from square one. And so I've had some very good experiences. I've had a lot of challenging experiences. But what I would say, what doesn't make you, it either makes you better or it makes you bitter. So I decided I'm going to be better. And it hones your character. And it makes you, and lately some things I'm going through because people still aren't happy. This is the second time I was elected to be the president of the city council. Like, oh no, not again. Here she is. So, they put up things, but what people don't realize, and I think this is something for all of us, is that when we are challenged, it makes us dive deeper and to increase our knowledge base to know that when we are challenged, we're able to go ahead and, meet that challenge and to move forward. So I'm going to leave it right there. Thank you.
Because being a constant learner, being a lifelong learner is so important on so many levels. And I personally appreciate what you've endured, being a resident of the city of Schenectady my entire life. And I am going to pass it to Damonni in this moment, because when we think about what we've learned to be able to be a representative at some level, can you talk a little bit about the things you learned in your experience running for office?
Certainly. So I want to kind of echo what Marion said about shout out to Joseph Allen. Joe Allen was the first person a long time ago who tapped me and said, you should think about, getting involved, politically. And I was at the time, like, I really couldn't see it. And what he explained to me was, and this isn't that long ago, he was saying, like, when he was running for office and was elected to office, he had actual letters from the Ku Klux Klan mailed letters to his house, death threats. And I remember thinking to myself, like, how crazy that was, because in my mind I would think that those things would happen so long ago. No, that is our very recent history. And I myself and other members of color that serve on city council have received hate mail, if you will, and things of that nature as well. So as much as we gain, obviously there's still a lot of progress needed. But I guess for me, something I learned is that you have to do the work, and you have to talk to people in a way that makes this decision, this right, this vote, relevant for them. Because Marion will tell you all the time, when we're out talking to people, I would randomly walk up to people and just ask them, if to register to vote, if not, oftentimes we hear people who say, oh, hey man, I don't do politics, and I immediately would say, well, guess what? Politics does you. And I constantly say that to people. When people say I don't do politics, I say, politics does you. And I think that what we really need to do, what I've learned, is to show up as your authentic self. I think that when I was running, there was a lot of people who have some experience in the political realm who kind of expected me to present differently than what I do. And I believe firmly that you can't win anything that you lose yourself in. But people related to my authentic message, and being born and raised here, not like I could reinvent myself, and people responded to that, and I think that we have to keep it real, but keep it relevant for people, and let them know. A lot of times people will kind of disassociate themselves from the political process because they don't recognize the very real consequences, right? So when before I ask people for their vote, or ask them, hey, you should register to vote, I ask them what they care about. What are in your neighborhood do you like? What don't you like? What are things you like to see more of? What are things you like to see less of? And then we have to kind of show them, kind of the thread, the connecting pieces, to say, like, this is, this person in this seat, has the decision-making capacity to make that a reality or not for you. And I think that if we continue to do that, that's one of the ways. And I think that there's multiple ways that we're going to have to speak to people to kind of get them out there voting. But something I learned is that, and I also learned something I knew, that, people are going to be big mad when you get elected. People are going to be upset, and they will do things that, that will question your character, your credibility. And here you are, like, wait a minute, this is the same guy that, you guys were saying good for doing all this community work. But then when you start talking in a way that holds people accountable, especially the status quo, as a man of color, that's a very unsettling thing for certain people. And boy, you think that you have a campaign to get elected, that campaign that will form to kind of get you out of office will happen real fast. And it's really interesting. So I've learned a lot about that. And I've also learned to just continue to stand on truth and recognize I stand on the shoulders of giants. And shout out to President Porterfield, the first Black woman president of the city of Schenectady, and many others. So.
Yeah, I wasn't going to let that slide if it didn't get mentioned. We're thinking about message and narrative and what folks are talking about. D. Colin, when you ran in Troy, what were the things you heard, or what was that experience like for you?
Well, it was a learning experience for sure. To run for the first time, I had never done it before. I've had people kind of like pass that around, D, you should run for office, and I just kind of like, are you sure? Like, that kind of thing, And the year that I ran for city council was, I think, a really big year for elections in Troy, because I was running for District 1. Keani Conley Wilson was running for District 5, and Marquita Edwards was running for District 6. It was like Black girl magic, like across Troy. And though Marquita and I did not win our races, I think it really inspired folks. One of my favorite things was to talk to people in District 1. That was my favorite part of campaigning, was knocking on doors and having real conversations with people. And for the folks that look like me who answered the door and realized, oh, you're running for office? Okay. Because they hadn't seen that. And I think, that's the biggest lesson, is, we can't wait for models to do the work. We have to kind of become those models. And by becoming the model, then we inspire other people to do the same thing. Especially when we don't know the history, right? It's just, that's key, is becoming the model that you want to see or that you don't have. So that was really my experience, was talking to people. And that was the good side of it too. I mean, I had other conversations with folks where it was, there was this big loyalty thing, particularly in my district, folks who went to school with, the other candidate, or, people who want to vote for people who were born and raised in Troy, rather than the other candidate who came from someplace else. I'm originally from Bridgeport, Connecticut. And I think that, that speaks a lot to what we're used to voting for. And to break the status quo, we have to be open to voting for people who, not only are a variety and diverse in race and identity, but also in skill set, also just different in age, different in professional experience. What does it look like to elect an artist to city council? That's a level of creativity that you bring to the table that might not be available in the same way with other candidates. And that's just as vital, right? And I think that really scares people sometimes. It's like, this is too different, or I don't really know what to do with you. Or, I had somebody who was like, are you old enough to run? And I was like, thank you for thinking I look that young, but it's a mindset, it's a mindset of what we're used to seeing, and breaking that means, like, we got to get people adjusted to the fact that everybody can, like, there's so many different kinds of people who can be on city council. And the more different it is, the more voices that we're able to bring to the table and have real conversations, then the more people we actually end up helping through our work,
Because it takes all of us.
Exactly.
Listen, I want to switch gears really quick because I know President Porterfield has to jump soon. I am coming back to you, Batman, but this is the last week of Black History Month. And before you leave this space, Marion, what do you say to folks who don't want to vote in the school board election that's coming up in May, or don't think they should be paying attention to local city races or even the presidential race? What is your message to those folks?
So my message to them, and I've already said it, is that when you don't make a decision, it is a decision. And that decision is that you've let someone else decide what your life is going to be like, what your community is going to be look like, what your representation is going to look like. If you don't go to the polling place and vote for Marion, Damonni, Colin, Jamaica, then you've said, well, whoever y'all choose, that's who I'll rock with. But if you really want representation, then you have to make sure you get there and make your voice heard. And not only that, you have to bring people with you. And these days, there's absolutely no excuse not to vote. So I say to people, if you're really interested in your future and what your community looks like and what your representation looks like and what your children's future looks like, let's just talk about it like that, then you have to get to the polling place and you have to make your voice heard. And there's numerous ways of doing that. And not only should you just go yourself, but gather your church family, your community, everybody. Get to the polls. We during election time, Damonni and I have done souls to the polls. You have to collectively make sure that you put people in office, and not only that, pay attention, because we all know all skin folk and kinfolk.
Come on now.
Say it. So educate yourself on the people that you're going to elect, because that's important as well. Some people just become, because we look alike, that doesn't mean that we necessarily have the same values and views. So it's important to educate yourself on the people, and look what they've done previously. Not everyone has been in elected office, but they've done something in the community somewhat, usually, right? So look what they've done, and look how they speak, and look how they move. Those things matter. And if they're really representing the community, then you'll know. But if they're not, and they're only representing themselves, that will come across as well. There's a woman that ran for senator, and she said this, and she actually won her. She's a sister, and she won her race. And one thing she said when I went to one of her events was that some people do it, some electeds do it for the people, and others do it for the power. So make sure you're looking for the people that do it they're for the people and not for the power. Because once they get the power, they're 9 times out of 10 going to forget about the people. So, and I can say for myself, I really try to stay connected to the community throughout. And when people see me, it's not during a year that I'm just going to be elected, because this is how I came to politics, because I wanted to represent people. So how do I forget about the people? Now I'm here. Okay, bye y'all. It's not that kind of story. So that's how I feel like people should come to look at voting.
I listen, I know that I could talk to Marion for like a whole nother hour. I appreciate that you took the time to talk to us as we continue this conversation, and then turn over to the community conversation. Marion, I'm sure I'll be talking to you soon. Thank you for being here, for the time that you were able to join us.
Thank you.
Batman. So we're now thinking about how we move forward, right? It's the end of Black History Month, but we Black History 365. We already know, right? But it is more than just voting, right? Civic engagement is not just being in the booth. And maybe we already said this, but I think it's worth saying it again. How do we move forward? How do we make sure more folks are engaged and involved? What's the message? You get the whole floor right now. What do you tell people that say, oh, I want more people involved, but I don't know what to do?
Register now at allofus.org for their mailing list to stay tuned. And I mean, that's funny, but it's actually true, right? In terms of the answer to that, it's organizing. It's organizing, being engaged, us being a part of it for a long haul, right? And All of Us is uniquely positioned to get everybody together, to facilitate those conversations. You have spaces in each one of the cities. As we're doing this thing, I'm sure in our own networks, we could all, host a live or something like that. But if we bring all of those resources to one table, one, we start to share other organic resources just from networking and stuff like that. But we also show the elected officials and everybody else, look, we are moving cohesively. We are speaking one language. We have one message. And I think All of Us did a great job, even with the 13 demands, and just being able to have concrete asks so that we know exactly what we're working towards and what our asks are. So it's not just, hey, fix the community. Okay, cool. But what does that look like, right? And when we can distill those points and then push for those points directly, then we can speak more informed to, no, this budget needs to be allocated here, and we think this should be a part of this project or whatever. So coordinating services, working together more, we're always stronger together. With All of Us, with other places that are doing the voter registration, voter education, I think that's where we go. We go forward together.
And there are groups and organizations in every city. So if there's a group you're looking for, it's very likely we've shared some of that information on our page, because when we say All of Us, we mean all of us. So that means the other groups and organizations, and the different ways that they're able to show up and support. I did drop in the chat the link tree for Untitled and Free that you can click and get additional information. We're in a little bit, we're about to ask folks their questions, their ideas, their thoughts. But Damonni, if I could be so bold, you ran twice. I am going to say that you did have the best theme song ever, but I'm biased because my daughter wrote a theme song for Damonni Farley. You can see it on my All of Us, not on my All of Us page. As we're moving forward, right? We're continuing to move forward. Schenectady now has more Black folks and more, it's a majority people of color on the city council. Albany's about to have a Black mayor. We've seen movement in Troy. So Damonni, how do we keep moving forward? What does that look like if we want to truly ensure there is representation, right? Not just elected, not a politician, but representation. Oh, yeah, that thing. Yep, got you.
Okay, thank you. So, well, that's a great question. And I think that's the question we have to continue to ask ourselves. Like, that's almost a constant, reoccurring thing that we have to keep in front of us. And I would say, like, with Schenectady in particularly, I think that, you know, we do have a majority of people of color on the city council now. And I think that sometimes people look at that and can be confused to think that, you know, there's, you know, that we don't have a diversity of thought and approach. And I think that, you know, as important as representation is and identity is, ideology is ultimately what is going to inform policies. So, you know, we have, so kind of to Marion's earlier point, that we have to make sure that we are not just saying, you know, this person looks like me, or so therefore I'm going to assume that they have a similar ideology than I do. We're going to make sure that people are actually holding myself and other elected officials accountable, because we are voting in a way, we are making our decisions with people, not for people. And we're also, because we're going to keep it real here today, we're also applying a nuanced lens when we're reasoning, looking at legislation. Let's be real. The nuanced lens, the okay, this, but not this, and that's not a popular opinion, to be honest, right? People are very, politics is very, you know, polarized in a way that people expect you to have, you know, us or them type of mentality. And the reality is you can't function in that space and be effective at what you do. So as a elected official of color, you're constantly making sure that you are checking your motivation, seeing how you're making the decisions that you're making, and then you have to go back to the people, you know, the people that, you know, gave you their vote of confidence and put you in office, and you have to be able to receive that constructive criticism, and you have to be okay with, you know, all that comes with that. So I kind of the long way of saying, continue to listen to the people that got you there. And something I used to do that was a little different than people that I was running with at some points. Like, I would go and talk to people who had like another political candidate sign in their lawn. I would do that because I want to know what people's values are. I want to know how they're making the decisions that they're making. And I don't assume, unless you ask my wife, she'll probably disagree with this, but I don't assume that I'm always right. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a level of you know, honest reflection that you have to be willing to have, and approach this with a level of humility to know that you're not representing yourself in your big brilliant brain. You're representing this community that doesn't need to be rescued. This is a community that is loaded with strengths and multiple skill sets, and you just have to tap into them and amplify.
Thank you.
Make it relevant.
Thank you. So folks, as a reminder, if you have questions, comments, ideas, thoughts, an aha moment, your options are, you can drop it in the chat for everybody to see. You can direct message me in the chat, or you raise your hand if you want to ask the question or share your voice yourself, because it takes all of us. There are a couple there already. And I also just want to add, and I think that Damonni spoke to this, when you are a representative, you are representing all of the people. And I think there is a misnomer that when folks have different political ideologies, it means they don't want the same thing. Now, yeah, it's true sometimes, for sure. There are definitely some folks that very strongly say, I'm okay with oppression. I'm okay with racism. I'm okay with you having less and me having more. That's real. But other topics, it really isn't. It's about how we get there. Safety is one that many of us have heard about, have talked about, have shared information about. As a school board member, whenever someone comes to a school board meeting and they make a comment, I write it down. Not just the people that I think agree with me. I'm listening to every single voice that speaks, and I'm listening for what can I do to address their problem. We may not agree about how to address the problem, but I indeed want to address the problem. And I believe that more often than not, we are all trying to find the solution. We just might not agree on the solution. Yes, everyone wants safety, but some of us want safety for everybody and not just some people, right? Everyone wants to be able to have housing. Some people think that it's not a right, it's a privilege. So again, I think more often than not, when we're thinking about representation, folks who sit in positions where they make decisions that impact other people's lives, we're asking the same questions. We just might not have the same answers. So I do have a couple questions in the chat. One is, what happens when you don't like the choices? Who wants to talk about what happens when you don't like the choices?
What choices specifically?
For who's elected to office. So you've got a slate of candidates in front of you for any seat, right? Could be local, state, federal. You may not like any choices. I definitely have an opinion, but I want to hear what other folks think. What you gonna do, D?
I feel like that's an ongoing every year dilemma on the ballot. You know, we're in a presidential election year, and I don't like anything that's going to be on the ballot for this year, right? So when that happens, I have to do as much research as possible to make an educated vote, you know. And I think that's even more true on the local level, because you know it's not as in your face as a presidential election. You know, when I was running, I had people who didn't even know who their rep was on city council. You know, like it's important for people to know who they're voting for or against or whatever. Whoever's name is on the ballot, like it's important to know something, have some information so you can make some kind of decision instead of just filling in the, you know, because I think the more we know about folks or more conversations that we have with people, we can make a decision even if it's hard.
Batman, because it's happened.
I'd say two things. One, keep in mind that this is long term. This is a marathon for sure. You know, people have been fighting this fight for a bunch of years. So even times, especially locally, when we have candidates that we really don't care for, or we wish there was, you know, better options on the table, or even more options, right? The one or two options is always stupid. Like we should definitely get to a point where there's like 10 people running for a thing and they all have viable chances. But whatever. Until we get there, I think one, understanding that's an issue, doing our best to direct people towards politics, tell them how they can be engaged, let them know what seats are available. A lot of these things run unopposed or 100 votes here and there. Those are things we can absolutely swing. So telling them, trying to create a better pipeline of people into those seats, right? I think that's the first thing. And then I think the other part of it for me is explaining to people, this is a job. And as you said, your job is to represent the people. This is not a forever job. So at worst, if you're a horrible person, you absolutely have a job performance date that's coming up in the form of an election where you don't have to keep this job any further. And again, as long as we're coordinated enough to leverage that accountability, then we have those systems in place and then we can have backups and we can avoid the problem being as widespread moving forward. But in the immediate, yeah, we got to kind of work our way through it, do research and the best we can.
You're right. You don't like the choices, run for office. You don't like who's running, you don't think any of them are good enough, you be the candidate. And there are definitely resources for that to happen. The other piece that I think is important is there is a barrier to our participation, and especially our informed participation. Where we are historically in this moment, if I could be so bold, is there are words that are shared at certain levels, like fascism or neoliberalism. Our folks might not know what the hell that means, but they have real implications, especially if we're thinking about the federal level. What happens with the Supreme Court, what happens with presidential races, and there are statewide congressional and Senate seats, right? Our state is represented at the federal level. It's not just the president. And that information, when we're like, how do we make an informed decision if we're looking at this person and trying to compare oranges to prunes? I didn't do it on purpose. Then how are we doing that? Because there are a lot of things happening right now. And I'm being vague, but y'all can use Google. Everyone walks around with a computer in your pocket. And you can make an informed decision, but you also need to know what your reliable sources are. Like, it is a whole process and it's a lot of work. And to that point, I will say this, and it's another reason why it's called All of Us. There's not a single one of us that can know every single thing about everything. Every single elected seat that's up, when they are up for election, how long their term is for, what is it that they voted for, that they voted against. Are you going to every single school board meeting, city council meeting, county ledge meeting? Are you going to the state capitol during legislative session, January through June, to sit there for hours on end in their committees or during the vote, and then watching online or on TV, on CNN or whatever, what's happening at the federal level? No. But if we work collectively, and this has been said before, if we work collectively and there's a group of us that are like, hey, I'm gonna focus on, the school board race and pay attention, and then let's all meet and share what we've learned, then we all can know everything. We all can make those informed decisions at every single level. And I think that historically we've learned that. But we also have been pushed to be disenfranchised and to be told that our vote doesn't matter. To get off my soapbox. It's a lot. And I mean, I got skin in the game. I have an election coming up. My re-election is coming up. It's months away. And I do have to think about these things right now. And I think about them every single day anyways. But are there other thoughts, ideas, comments, questions, either from the panel themselves or folks that are watching right now? Again, you can either, I see you, Batman, you can either drop it in the chat directly to me, to the group, or if you want to raise your hand and ask the question yourself. There is someone in the room right now that I'd be surprised if they did not have something to say. Go ahead, Batman.
I just wanted to take a second to highlight that's like comparing oranges to prunes is crazy. That was wow, caught me off guard. I'm taking notes and like stuff while we're talking. That's why I'm like looking down, and I was like, oh, I'm writing that down. So I just wanted to plus one that. That was hilarious. And then also I think just we need teams too, right? Like I think all of us needs an extensive team. Each thing that you talked about, getting the information, synthesizing, getting out to people, blah, blah, blah. Each one of those things is like a 4-person team as it is. So I'm literally taking notes about what that would take and how we can weave that together. But yeah, let me know what your sign-up list looks like. We'll put something together.
It is a lot of work, but it's possible. And like we watched that clip. In the 1800s, there were thousands of Black people in elected office. and folks got mad. They got big mad, right? What Damonni said, they're gonna be big mad. Um, and we have to be prepared for that too, because we know the backlash is coming, or the white lash. So we need to be prepared for that too. What's up, Damonni? What you thinking right now?
No, yeah, you're definitely talking my language. And I think that, we have to remember until, a lot of people are willing to do a little bit of people will be tasked to do a lot, right? And all we have to do is, again, I got to be real, y'all. It's not that hard. I don't think it's not that hard because, again, we stand on the shoulders of giants. There are people who have done this to this clip that we watched earlier with far more barriers. I mean, literally it being life or death, who have done this, who have made these great sacrifices on our behalf. We have to find the compelling reasons to do this work and to hold each other accountable. And again, not just looking to people who are politically involved or look like they are the user-friendly person who just organically fit into this political box. There's a lot of strength and untapped resources and non-traditional leaders in our communities who are willing to, if you help demonstrate to them, like, hey, there's a need here, who are willing to step up and fill that void. And I think that we just have to stay connected to the people and talk to people in a way that makes sense, but also don't stay in our small political boxes. Talk to the person that you think would never vote, or for whatever reason communicates to you that they're not very politically involved. Those are people who have skill sets, number one. Those are people who have resources, number two. And those are people who care about their family and their community. And if those three things are present, then you have a resource that you need to tap into. So it's a lot of work, but there's also a lot of us. And so we just have to tap into that network.
For sure. I will push you on one thing.
Please.
It is hard. And there are barriers, and they are real. And sometimes they are comparative to what it took our ancestors to fight. Because we do have single parents who are working 3-4 jobs with no support, and traversing poverty on the daily. And to be able to stop and think, I should go vote when you don't know if your light bill is going to be paid or if you're going to have a roof over your head, without the community support, right? That I look forward to the world where we truly are a community of collective individuals who support each other, and that our representation is the same, that we are thinking about every single one of us, so that mom who has kids in, I don't know, first grade and 6th or 7th grade, and then maybe a kid in college, and the other one's working full-time as a teacher. What does it take to get her to the polls? Does she need somebody to watch her kids because the youngest has an IEP and he can't handle crowds? Does she need there to be a meal because folks are just hungry? And how do you think if you're hungry, right? So how do we support each other? Because when we work collectively, we shut shit down. But the barriers are real and they exist across the greater capital region. And so I will say to folks that may watch this and go, well, it is hard. I see you, and I don't want that to pass.
Yeah. And
I also say to them, I'm also going to say to those same people, there are those of us that would willingly help you and support you. You just got to ask, sis.
Yeah. And if I could, to be clear about that point, it's like,
I see D. Colin, I see you.
I'm definitely not in any way minimizing the barriers. It's not that I don't believe how that the work is hard, but what I believe in more, what has been demonstrated time and time again, is our capacity to build community around an issue and move the needle. So I know it's difficult. It becomes a lot less difficult when we all chip in and do a piece. But I'm gonna tell you, one thing that I won't do is ever fight for our limitations, because we are a limitless people. That's all I'm trying to say.
I'm gonna take that, D. Colin.
I just wanted to extend the challenges to running for office in the first place. You know, we think about city council members who get paid a very part-time salary for a full-time commitment. That's not accessible to a lot of folks. If you're already not making a lot of money, or you got to work two jobs just to make ends meet or whatever, and you want to run for office, you're capable, you have a skill set, you have things to offer, but if you were to do this, you'd have to give up one of those money making commitments that you have for something that doesn't even give you a third of that income. So there's that part of it too. I think that positions on city council or mayoral positions, if we really want people to get involved in running for office, it's not about the money, but people should be able to live off of the work that they are doing for the community, especially if they are representing an entire district or the whole city. So I know that's a barrier for folks to run.
School board members get paid zero. It is the only elected office in New York State where you don't get paid anything. I believe there are 4 districts that the boards do get paid. I know Rochester is one of them, but there's over 100 school districts in New York State and ain't nobody getting paid. And yes, it is a full-time job. So I get paid zero for a full-time job, and the budget for our school district is more than $200 million. That is our fiscal responsibility. I am one of 7 members, $200 million, and almost 10,000 students for the entire city of Schenectady to make sure every single one of them gets an education, but zero in compensation. And I sit on the policy committee, and it's not just me. Again, D, you're right. City council, you want me to come do a job, but I'm not getting paid. CPRB, y'all get paid?
We just started getting a stipend like last year.
Oh, you mean because you fought for it, you got it on the ballot, and you actually got a budget?
And ours is also the lowest of all the city departments and agencies. We're the only committee and board that gets that amount, but they didn't want to give it to us anyway. We had to, make that a battle, but it worked.
Yeah. Indeed, here we are, fighting not just for representation, but for that accessibility. We have a few more minutes left. If anyone has questions, comments, thoughts, ideas that you want to share, either in the chat, or I know somebody's about to raise their hand and lend their voice. Anybody? Look at that. If you could say your name and introduce yourself and ask or comment.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Sean Young, the other co-founder of All of Us Community Action. Peace, y'all. I'm on here late, fam. I just got out of a training down here in Selma, nonviolence practitioners, and I guess the question I have for you all is just looking forward, right? Looking forward. What does this year look like for you? What are the changes we can get this year? What are the changes that are coming down the pipe next year? And how are you seeing that coming to life? Like, what is your role in bringing those changes to life? And I asked that question for all 3 of the panelists.
I'll start with Batman, then D. Colin, then Damonni.
I'm very excited about it. I think with all the different mayoral candidates, it gives us an opportunity to make them come to talk to the people and engage in a different way, to have these conversations. Since there is no clear cut winner, but everybody feels like they have a viable chance, then they all are incentivized to come and talk to the people, right? So I think there's an opportunity to connect people directly with the politicians who are going to be running for office. I think that's super empowering. I think outside of that, you know, if we push our voter engagement right and we push our voter registration right and stuff like that, we can create a base, right? A base of voters that people actually have to respect, that represent these interests, that can sway, you know, a seat or an election, especially like we said, when it's 100 votes here and there or unopposed or whatever. If we can demonstrate our ability to be impactful in these elections, combined with the fact here in Albany, we have the incoming mayor thing, it could be a nice moment. So my role in all of that is working with groups like all of us and other people, you know, my young guy, we are revolutionaries, you know, looking forward, you know, but getting everybody together, as many hands on deck so we can get as many people registered as possible, to just really take advantage of the moment, the time we have right now. Similarly, a couple of years ago, there are moments, there are opportunities, there are windows. The windows don't last forever. But if we can get something tangible every time one of those windows opens, hey, we're fighting a good fight. We're making progress consistently. So that's what I'm excited for, and that's what I'm going to do.
D. Colin?
Well, I'm not running for office this year. Although people have asked me, I won't say that it'll never happen again. I'm leaving that door open for possibilities in the future. But I'm excited about building community this year. That's really where my focus has been. At my core, I am a creative and an artist, and I think folks who are in the arts are essential. They are the pulse of the culture, and they're the temperature check that the community relies on for, you know, the things that we don't get to talk about. They're kind of the voice box for that. So I'm excited about building community and healing and empowerment through creative spaces. And that's across the capital region. That's in Schenectady, that's in Albany, that's in Troy. That's kind of, I consider myself a bridge because I have a large network, because I'm connected to different organizations. I'm really interested in how we all work together and how I can be a bridge between cities, between organizations, and between different mobilizing actions throughout the capital region.
Round us out, Damonni.
Okay, so I'm excited about a lot of stuff, but I'll try to keep it brief. First of all, I'll salute to the brother Sean, man. I appreciate the question, and it kind of anchors us back into where we need to be, what you're looking for. You know, just, you know, recently we worked on some legislation here in the city of Schenectady that will have people who are, you know, in other words, if you're in an apartment and you have a slumlord, not, you know, a landlord slumlord who is trying to start the eviction process. You know, right now they won't be able to do that unless they have a housing certificate. And that the reason why that's really, really important legislation that I'm super excited to talk about is obviously it not only speaks to, you know, housing stability, but also, you know, it incentivizes landlords to make sure that people have a safe housing situation. So I'm super excited about that. As far as looking forward, definitely around our youth jobs, youth employment. We just launched the first city-sponsored youth employment situation last year, and look forward to continue to do that. I think that, you know, I'm excited about not only working on, you know, kind of what's on the table, but bringing more people in, more voices in, and really helping people know, because, you know, people, we talk about marginalized people being voiceless, and, you know, I don't want to totally destroy the quote, but it's not that people don't have a voice, it's just that people have not been listening. So really trying to encourage people to come to the table and recognizing their the multiple skill sets. Again, we have a strong, resilient community with so many tools, so much to offer. And we just need to tap into that in a way that is effective and produces results. So happy about the, some of the legislations that passed, but really looking for more voices and finding ways, entry points for people to get more politically involved.
And what I will say is that all of us is going to keep doing the damn thing. That's what we do. But that includes and is not limited to, this is not the last of our discussions, y'all. This may be the last one for Black History Month, but we Black History 365. And also we know the power of the community that we're in, right? The three of y'all, we had Tony Gaddy, Arthur Butler, Jasmine Gripper, like the list goes on. And some of the folks that have been attendees, right? Like those people, like just it's all the things. Also our campaign associates, listen, you looking for work, you be looking for that job posting coming up, because our campaign associates, the last 2 cycles we've had were amazing, did the damn thing out in the community, and they were all people of color, majority Black folks, because we invest in our communities, right? So if we gonna hire, that's what we're gonna do. And as well as just continuing to build and look for opportunities to work across the board with other folks. And last but not least, I'm gonna run my reelection because I've been about education for more than 25 years now. It's not gonna stop. When I made that decision after winning the case against New York State and getting more than $40 million for the city of Schenectady and forcing New York State to pay $4.2 billion to the rest of New York State, what else can I do except for sit there and make sure that the policies we implement address the inequities that we already had? So I will be doing that for the next couple of months, and look forward to working with everyone that's on this panel, folks that have been on the other panels and the calls. And as we wrap it up tonight, folks don't like when we do this, but I'm gonna do it anyways. We end in Black History Month. We blackity black black. We talked about the history, the present, the future. What's the one word that you're gonna leave folks with as we are closing out Black History Month, but kicking off Black History 365? And I'm just gonna say one more time so you can think about it. What's that one word? If you was gonna leave one word with folks as we close out this discussion, but kick off Black History 365, what's that one word, D. Colin?
It's a phrase. It's keep that same energy.
It can
Keep
be
that same energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I went to D. Colin first because she for real is a poet and always eloquent and with all the words and saying the things and bringing like all the energy. So I knew where to start. Damonni, one word or phrase?
First, shout out to D for renorming that so I can say more than one word. So I'll say a few words. Definitely would be liberation and solidarity.
All right, Batman. And it can't be save the city.
Rise.
Rise. And still I rise. It has been a blessing not just to have this discussion today with y'all, as well as with Councilwoman, Madam President Marion Porterfield, but all of the discussions that we've had this month. I named everybody, some folks on this call right now. This is the work we do, and it's important because if we don't create the platform for ourselves to be heard, no one's going to give it to us. And so I'm glad that we were intentional to make sure that space was offered, and that we continue to do the work, not just in Schenectady, but across the greater capital region, reaching out and encouraging folks to join us in the fight for liberation, justice, and freedom. So I hope that everyone has a blessed evening and that you continue to do the work that you're doing as panelists, and that folks that may be in the audience, so to speak, join us. Be a part of the work, because there is no part of the work that is too small, and each of you brings something that is necessary. So I hope that everyone has a good evening, and I'll talk to y'all soon.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much for this.
Good night.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.